You have learned how to survive. You have learned how to stay strong. You have learned how to carry responsibilities without complaining. But what happens when your soul is tired of being the strong one? This is not about weakness. This is about silent exhaustion. The kind no one sees. The kind that hides behind productivity, faithfulness, and smiles. The kind that whispers at night, "I cannot keep doing this at this pace." Most people wake up and fight the wrong battle. They try to conquer the day without addressing the weight inside them. They chase motivation when what they need is restoration. They look for discipline when what they need is honesty. David faced a giant in the valley, but before that public moment, there was a private formation. There was wrestling. There was solitude. There was the internal battle that no one applauded. This morning is not about becoming stronger. It is about becoming real. Because if you keep pretending you are fine, you will fight today's battles with yesterday's strength. And that is how giants win. So before we speak about courage, before we speak about victory, we must confront something deeper. When your soul is tired of being strong, there is a specific fatigue that comes from always being the reliable one, the stable one, the one who holds faith together when others are shaking. You pray, you serve, you show up. But inside, something feels drained, not rebellious, not sinful, just tired. The Bible does not ignore this reality. In 1 Kings chapter 19, after Elijah called down fire from heaven, he ran into the wilderness and asked God to take his life. The same prophet who stood boldly before kings collapsed under emotional weight. Strength in public did not erase exhaustion in private. Your weariness does not cancel your faith. It reveals your humanity. Many believers feel guilty for being tired, as if devotion should eliminate fatigue, as if spiritual maturity means emotional invincibility. That belief is dangerous. It pushes people to perform strength instead of seeking renewal. Jesus himself, in John chapter 4, sat by a well because he was weary from the journey. The Son of God embraced physical limitation without shame. If you feel tired of always being strong, you are not failing. You are reaching the edge of your own capacity. And that edge is not a threat. It is an invitation to stop surviving and start depending. But there is a subtle lie that keeps people from accepting that invitation. And if we do not confront it, you will continue trying to impress a God who is not asking for performance. The lie that God only meets the energetic. There is a quiet belief many people carry without realizing it. It says God responds better when you are spiritually sharp, emotionally disciplined, and mentally focused. It whispers that you must come to him charged, inspired, ready. So when you feel drained, distracted, or heavy, you hesitate. You postpone prayer. You wait until you feel better. You try to fix yourself before approaching him. That is not reverence. That is distortion. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, Jesus does not say, "Come to me when you are strong." He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden." The invitation is not for the energized, it is for the burdened. But religion subtly rewrites that verse in our minds. It teaches us to approach God polished, composed, presentable, as if exhaustion disqualifies intimacy. Grace does not operate on your energy level. It operates on your need. If access to God depended on spiritual enthusiasm, most people would feel distant every Monday morning. But the gospel was never built on emotional momentum. It was built on divine initiative. When the prodigal son returned in Luke chapter 15, he was not radiant. He was not confident. He was rehearsing a speech out of shame, and before he finished, the father ran to him. God moves toward weakness, not away from it. The problem is not that God withdraws when you are tired. The problem is that you assume he does. And that assumption creates unnecessary distance. What if the very moment you feel least spiritual is the moment he is closest? Before we go further, we must confront something deeper than exhaustion. We must confront how God designed your limits in the first place. The theology of human limits. You are not designed to be limitless. And that is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. From the beginning, Scripture establishes rhythm. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 2-3, God rested, not because he was tired, but to establish a pattern. Creation itself carries built-in pauses. That means limitation is not a result of failure. It is part of divine architecture. Even Jesus embraced this design. In Mark chapter 6, verse 31, after intense ministry, he told his disciples to come away to a deserted place and rest. He did not rebuke their fatigue. He acknowledged it. We often treat exhaustion like a spiritual malfunction. We think if we were stronger, wiser, more disciplined, we would not hit walls. But walls are not punishments, they are boundaries, and boundaries protect what matters. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 records, God telling Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Notice that power is not perfected in independence, it is perfected in limitation. When you resist your limits, you end up resisting the very space where grace operates. You try to be self-sustaining in areas where God designed you to be dependent. Your body needs sleep, your mind needs quiet, your spirit needs renewal. None of that contradicts faith. It confirms design. The danger is not that you are limited. The danger is that you deny it. Because when you deny your limits, you push past healthy surrender and enter silent burnout. And burnout rarely announces itself loudly. It disguises itself as something else. Why spiritual disconnection often feels like emotional numbness. Not every season of spiritual distance is rebellion. Sometimes it is overload. That emotional numbness can spill into spiritual perception. In Psalm chapter 42, the psalmist does not deny God. He says, "Why are you cast down, O my soul?" He speaks to inner heaviness, not to unbelief. His struggle is emotional before it is theological. When Elijah fled in 1 Kings chapter 19, God did not first preach to him. He let him sleep. He fed him. Only after restoration did conversation resume. That order matters. Sometimes what feels like spiritual disconnection is simply an exhausted soul trying to survive. You do not need louder music. You do not need forced enthusiasm. You may need quiet restoration. The danger is mislabeling emotional fatigue as spiritual failure. That mislabeling creates shame. And shame builds walls, but there is a discipline that directly confronts this culture of urgency and emotional overload. It is rarely taught, often misunderstood, and deeply powerful. The sacredness of slowness. You have been trained to move fast. Fast decisions, fast responses, fast results. Even your prayers sometimes feel rushed, as if heaven operates on a countdown, but God does not compete with your schedule. Slowness is not laziness, it is alignment. In Luke chapter 10, verse 39, Mary sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Martha was busy with many tasks. Jesus did not condemn work. He corrected anxiety. He called attention to distraction disguised as devotion. Slowness is a spiritual resistance against urgency culture. It is choosing presence over productivity. When you rush into the day, your mind stays fragmented. When you slow down, your awareness sharpens. You begin to notice what you were too distracted to perceive. You begin to hear what noise was drowning. Jesus often withdrew to solitary places, as recorded in Luke chapter 5, verse 16, not occasionally, often. That means slowness was not accidental. It was intentional rhythm. If you never slow down, you will confuse activity with intimacy. You will measure your spirituality by output instead of connection. Slowness forces you to confront what is happening inside. It exposes anxiety. It reveals hidden fears. That is why many people avoid it. But in that quiet space, performance begins to dissolve. And when performance dissolves, something uncomfortable surfaces. When prayer feels heavy instead of holy. There are mornings when prayer feels natural, and there are mornings when it feels like lifting something your soul no longer has strength to carry. You sit down, you try to focus. But instead of peace, you feel pressure. Instead of closeness, you feel expectation, as if you must say the right words, sustain the right emotion, maintain the right posture. That weight does not come from God. In Romans chapter 8, verse 26, it says the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what we should pray for as we ought. That verse removes performance from prayer. It acknowledges limitation. It legitimizes confusion. Prayer was never designed to be a spiritual presentation. It is not a report. It is not a speech. It is not a demonstration of strength. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, in Matthew chapter 26, verse 38 to 39, did not sound composed. He said his soul was deeply sorrowful. He asked if the cup could pass. There was honesty, there was tension, there was vulnerability. If the Son of God prayed from anguish, you are not disqualified for praying from fatigue. When prayer feels heavy, it may be because you are trying to carry what you were meant to release. You approach God as if you must sustain the conversation, when in reality, presence sustains you. Maybe the shift you need is not more intensity, but less pressure. And that shift requires observing something powerful in the life of Jesus that most people overlook. Jesus and the ministry of pauses. If you read the Gospels carefully, you will notice something that challenges modern spirituality. Jesus was never rushed. Crowds pressed him, needs surrounded him, expectations followed him. Yet he paused. In Mark chapter 1, verse 35, before daylight, he went to a solitary place to pray. The ministry was growing. Demands were increasing. Still, he stepped away. In John chapter 11, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he did not run immediately. He stayed where he was 2 more days. That pause was intentional, not neglect, not indifference, alignment. Pauses are not interruptions of purpose. They are part of purpose. We live as if momentum proves faith, as if constant activity proves obedience. But Jesus built margin into his mission. He withdrew from applause. He stepped back from urgency. He allowed space between action and reaction. A pause protects your interior life. Without pauses, you react emotionally instead of responding spiritually. You answer pressure instead of discerning direction. You confuse noise with necessity. There is a difference between being available and being aligned. If the Son of God embraced pauses, why do you feel guilty for needing them? The absence of pause leads to something dangerous. It feeds an illusion that looks strong on the surface, but hides something fragile underneath. The difference between spiritual silence and divine absence. There are seasons when heaven feels quiet. You pray, but there is no immediate response. You seek clarity, but direction feels delayed. And slowly, a thought forms. Maybe God stepped back. Silence is not absence. In 1 Samuel chapter 3, before Samuel recognized the voice of the Lord, there was stillness. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Yet God had not withdrawn. He was preparing revelation. Silence often tests perception, not presence. Think about the disciples in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 41. Jesus was in the boat during the storm. He was asleep. They assumed indifference. They mistook calm for neglect. But his silence did not mean he had abandoned the boat. Divine absence would mean separation. Spiritual silence often means formation. When God seems quiet, something deeper may be happening. Your trust is being refined. Your dependency is being purified. You are learning to anchor in character, not in constant reassurance. We prefer constant feedback. We want immediate confirmation. But intimacy matures in seasons where you stay even when you do not feel. Silence reveals what your faith is attached to. Is it attached to experience or to truth? And sometimes what blocks your awareness of his nearness is not his distance. It is something within you that feels strong but quietly isolates you. The ego hidden inside self-sufficiency. There is a version of strength that looks admirable but quietly isolates you. It says, "I can handle this." It avoids asking for help. It avoids showing weakness. It avoids dependence. It sounds mature. It feels responsible. But underneath it carries ego. Self-sufficiency can become a refined way of avoiding surrender. In Genesis chapter 32, Jacob wrestled through the night. He fought hard. He resisted release. And only when his hip was touched and his strength shifted did transformation begin. His name changed after he limped. Sometimes God allows your strength to weaken because independence blocks intimacy. We often pray for provision while secretly trusting our control. We ask for guidance while refusing to release outcomes. That tension creates spiritual distance, not because God moved away, but because control occupied the space where trust should live. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 9 says, Paul experienced pressure beyond his ability so that he would not rely on himself, but on God. That is uncomfortable. It confronts pride gently but directly. Self-sufficiency feels safe. Dependence feels exposed. But exposure is where connection deepens. The more you insist on carrying everything alone, the heavier it becomes. And eventually exhaustion forces a decision. Either you collapse under control or you surrender into trust. Exhaustion as a form of surrender. There is a moment when your strength runs out and you can no longer pretend you are managing well. That moment feels dangerous. It feels like losing control. But sometimes it is the doorway you have been avoiding. Exhaustion strips illusion. When you are strong, you negotiate with God. You present plans. You offer timelines. You suggest solutions. But when you are depleted, negotiation stops. You do not strategize. You reach. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10, Paul says, "When I am weak, then I am strong." That statement is not poetic exaggeration. It is a spiritual paradox. Weakness exposes the end of self-reliance and the beginning of surrendered trust. Exhaustion can become surrender when you stop fighting your limits and start yielding within them. Think about Peter in Luke chapter 5. After fishing all night and catching nothing, he was tired, frustrated, and ready to quit. That was the moment Jesus told him to launch into deep water. Not when he felt confident, when he felt empty. Your tiredness may be the space where control loosens. Surrender is not dramatic. It is quiet. It sounds like, "I cannot do this without you." It feels like releasing the need to impress, to manage, to sustain everything. But surrender leads to something even deeper than relief. It leads to relearning the nature of your relationship with God. Relearning how to be with God instead of doing for God. Somewhere along the way, faith became activity. Serve more, produce more, show up more. And slowly, being with God was replaced by doing things for God. Activity is visible, intimacy is not. In Luke chapter 10, verse 41 to 42, Jesus told Martha that only one thing was necessary, not 10. Not constant movement. One thing, presence. You can build projects and still feel distant. You can help others and still feel dry. Because relationship cannot be sustained by performance. In John chapter 15, verse 4, Jesus says, "Abide in me." He does not say, "Work for me." Abiding is not achievement, it is connection, it is staying. When faith becomes productivity, burnout is inevitable. You measure your worth by output. You feel closer when you perform well, and distant when you do not. But God is not a supervisor reviewing metrics. He is a father seeking closeness. Relearning how to be with him requires unlearning the need to impress him. It requires sitting without agenda, praying without script, listening without rushing. When you shift from doing to being, something subtle changes inside. The noise softens, and yet there is still another layer that interferes with awareness. It is not effort this time. It is distraction. The inner noise that blocks divine awareness. God is not distant. Your mind is loud. You wake up and before your feet touch the ground, your thoughts are already running. Responsibilities, conversations, notifications, comparisons, regrets, plans. The internal volume is constant. And then you say, "I do not feel God." In 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 11 to 12, Elijah experienced wind, earthquake, and fire. But the Lord was not in those. He was in a gentle whisper, not because God is weak, but because awareness requires quiet. Inner noise is not only external distraction, it is mental clutter, unresolved tension, imagined scenarios, emotional residue from yesterday. When your interior world is chaotic, subtle presence becomes difficult to perceive. Psalm chapter 46 verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness precedes knowing. You cannot cultivate awareness while constantly consuming stimulation. You cannot sense whisper-level guidance while rehearsing arguments in your head. The problem is not that God stopped speaking. The problem is that other voices have priority. Silence your interior long enough and you may realize he never left. But quieting the noise requires something uncomfortable. It requires honesty without filters. The courage to show up, unfiltered. Most people approach God edited. They remove doubt from their sentences. They soften anger. They hide disappointment. They polish language. They filter emotion. And then they wonder why intimacy feels shallow. Intimacy cannot grow where honesty is restricted. In Psalm chapter 13, David asked, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" That is not sanitized spirituality. That is raw prayer, and it is preserved in Scripture. In Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 7, the prophet said he felt deceived. In Job chapter 3, Job cursed the day of his birth. None of them were rejected for their honesty. God is not intimidated by your unfiltered emotions. The fear is that if you speak openly, you will expose weakness. But vulnerability is not rebellion, it is access. When you hide what you truly feel, you pray around the issue instead of through it. You stay distant while pretending to be close. Courage in prayer is not volume, it is transparency. When you begin to speak without spiritual performance, connection deepens, relief begins, pretending ends. And once pretense is removed, you start to recognize something unexpected. Not performing miracles, shepherding, an ordinary task in an ordinary place. In Luke chapter 24, verse 15, the risen Christ walked beside two disciples on a road. They were not in a temple, they were walking and talking. The sacred entered the ordinary. If you keep waiting for extraordinary settings, you will miss quiet companionship in daily rhythm. God does not only meet you in high moments, He meets you in repetition. When you begin to look for Him in the normal, awareness shifts. Gratitude increases, anxiety decreases, presence becomes integrated, not occasional. The divine is not confined to peaks. It walks with you in the plain, and when you realize that, something settles inside you. You stop striving upward and start noticing nearness. You do not climb to God. He comes to you. For a long time you believed spirituality was a ladder. Pray harder, try more, improve discipline, fix flaws, climb higher. But the gospel is not a ladder, it is a descent. John chapter 1 verse 14 says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." He did not wait for humanity to ascend. He entered weakness. He stepped into limitation. He moved toward us. In Luke chapter 19 verse 5, Jesus stopped under a tree and called Zacchaeus by name before Zacchaeus could say a word. Initiative came from heaven, not effort from earth. You do not climb into grace. Grace steps into your reality. When you are tired, He comes near. When you are confused, He stays present. When you feel numb, He does not withdraw. The cross in Matthew chapter 27 verse 50 to 51 tore the veil from top to bottom. Access was opened from His side. You do not have to perform your way into proximity. Rest in that. Stop climbing. Let Him come close. If this morning prayer truly spoke to you, do not let this moment end here. Subscribe to the channel right now, not just as a click, but as a commitment to begin your mornings with clarity, strength, and God's presence before any other voice shapes your day. Every morning you choose what will influence your mind first. Choose alignment, choose peace, choose intentional faith. And I want to ask you something important. Go to the comments and share what part of this prayer impacted you the most today. Was it about exhaustion, silence, surrender, or realizing that God comes near even in weakness? When you comment, you are not just engaging. You are declaring. You are reinforcing your faith and encouraging someone else who may be listening quietly. If this prayer helped you, make it part of your daily rhythm. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back tomorrow. Let's keep starting the day the right way.